Dubai had seen its share of lavish weddings, but none quite like this. The ballroom of a five-star hotel gleamed with gold and crystal, chandeliers dripping light across marble floors polished so perfectly they mirrored the faces of the guests. Roses imported from Europe spilled across the tables, their fragrance mixing with the scent of oud drifting through the air. Every detail spoke of wealth, power, and status. At the center of it all stood Omar Al-Mansour, the groom. At 36, Omar was the son of a powerful Emirati family, heir to a fortune built on real estate and oil. His kandjura was pristine white, his gold-trimmed bisht draped elegantly over his shoulders, a subtle but unmistakable display of power. His posture was that of a man who had never been denied. For Omar, marriage was not just about love. It was about image, honor, and securing a future that reflected his family's prestige. The bride, Leila Santos, was a vision in ivory lace. Only 27, she came from a modest Filipino family who had settled in Dubai decades earlier. Her beauty was undeniable, soft brown eyes, luminous skin, and a graceful presence that seemed to capture the attention of every camera flashing in the room. To outsiders, her marriage to Omar was a fairy tale, a woman from humble beginnings marrying into unimaginable wealth. For her family, it was the dream of a lifetime, a chance at security, at elevation. But inside Leila's heart, the fairy tale carried thorns. She smiled dutifully, her hand resting lightly on Omar's arm, but her eyes betrayed flickers of unease. To her, this wedding was not only a union but a surrender. She was stepping into a world of expectations, a life where her every move would be watched, her every word judged. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, marveling at the spectacle. Politicians, businessmen, and socialites mingled freely, glasses of champagne raised in honor of the newlyweds. The band played softly, their music drowned occasionally by the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter. To them, this was more than a wedding. It was a display of wealth and influence, a reminder of the Al-Mansour family's place in Dubai's hierarchy. Leila's family sat at a table near the back, overwhelmed but proud. Her mother dabbed at her tears, whispering prayers of gratitude. Her father, a quiet man, looked on with both pride and unease, as if he, too, sensed the unspoken tension hidden beneath the glamour. When Omar raised his glass for a toast, the hall silenced instantly. Tonight, we celebrate not only a marriage, but a union of love, honor, and family. May this be the beginning of a lifetime of loyalty and strength. The applause was thunderous. Leila smiled, but her lips trembled faintly. The word loyalty rang heavy in her ears, almost like a warning. As the couple danced their first dance, Omar held her close, his grip firm, his smile for the crowd polished and practiced. To the world they were perfection, the golden groom and his radiant bride. But beneath the glittering chandeliers, hidden from the eyes of the guests, a storm was already brewing. For Leila carried secrets, secrets that, if revealed, could shatter the fragile illusion of this perfect union. And for Omar, a man raised to guard his honor above all else, betrayal was not just personal, it was unforgivable. The wedding ended with fireworks lighting up the Dubai sky, dazzling and blinding. But like all fireworks, the beauty masked the danger. Beneath the sparkle, something darker waited to ignite. The morning after the wedding, the newlyweds boarded a private jet bound for the Maldives. For Omar, nothing less than the best would do. The turquoise waters, white sand beaches, and glass villas suspended over the ocean were the kind of paradise he believed his wife deserved, or at least the paradise that reflected his wealth and status. Leila gazed out the window as the plane soared above the clouds. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman living her dream. But inside, her thoughts were restless. She replayed the wedding night, Omar's confident smile, the expectations of his family, the weight of her new title as Mrs. Al-Mansour. It all felt unreal, like she was playing a role in a film she hadn't chosen to act in. When they arrived, the resort staff greeted them with garlands of flowers, cold towels, and champagne. Omar beamed with pride, pulling Leila close, insisting they be photographed at every turn. He posted their smiling faces online, a curated display of perfection for the world to admire. For Leila, the setting was breathtaking, candle-lit dinners on the beach, private cruises across the Indian Ocean, and suites filled with fresh orchids and silk sheets. Yet, despite the beauty around her, something inside her felt hollow. She smiled when Omar kissed her forehead, laughed when he told stories, but in the quiet moments she withdrew. Omar noticed. At first he brushed it aside, telling himself she was simply adjusting to married life. But the longer he watched, the more it gnawed at him. She was present, yet absent, there in body, but far away in spirit. At night, when he reached for her, she responded with practiced affection, but without passion. Her eyes would drift away when she thought he wasn't looking. Once, he awoke in the middle of the night to find her sitting on the balcony, her phone glowing in her hands, her face illuminated by the faint blue light. When she noticed him, she quickly set it aside, forcing a smile. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. But Omar's mind began to race. Who was she messaging? Why the secrecy? Still, he told himself not to overthink. He was a husband now, and husbands trusted their wives. Besides, what woman wouldn't be happy with a life like this? Luxury, protection, and his devotion. Yet, deep inside, an unease began to take root. For Layla, the honeymoon was not the escape it was meant to be. Each sunset over the ocean reminded her of what she had left behind. The laughter, the intimacy, the forbidden love she had once tasted with another man. She tried to silence those thoughts, to tell herself this was her destiny, her family's dream. But temptation has a way of haunting even the most determined heart. As the days passed, their honeymoon became a performance, smiles for the staff, photos for social media, laughter loud enough for strangers to hear. Behind closed doors, however, silence grew louder, suspicion thicker. The Maldives was paradise, yes, but even paradise cannot hide the truth for long. And soon, Omar would discover the cracks in the illusion, cracks that would turn paradise into hell. Long before the glittering wedding and the Maldives honeymoon, Layla's life had been simple. She worked as a receptionist at a private clinic in Dubai, living with her parents in a modest apartment in Dera. Her father, a retired driver, and her mother, a homemaker, had raised her with discipline and faith. They dreamed she would one day marry well, maybe a businessman or professional, someone who could give her the stability they had never known. But life rarely followed the plans of parents. Layla was young, intelligent, and strikingly beautiful. Wherever she went, she turned heads, sometimes unwanted, sometimes intoxicating. At the clinic, she met dozens of men from all walks of life, but one encounter changed everything. It was with Khalid Al-Fahim, a wealthy Emirati businessman and distant cousin of Omar. Khalid had come for a routine appointment, but the moment he saw Layla behind the desk, his interest shifted from health to desire. Unlike many of the men who tried to charm her, Khalid was bold and relentless. He sent flowers, left notes, and eventually persuaded her to meet him outside of work. What began as coffee became dinners. What began as glances became stolen nights. Layla, who had lived a sheltered life, found herself swept into a world of expensive gifts, secret hotel suites, and whispered promises. Khalid's confidence intoxicated her, and though she knew she was risking everything, she couldn't resist the thrill of being desired so intensely. But Khalid was no ordinary man. He was married, with children, and his reputation in Dubai's elite circles was complicated. His flirtations were tolerated but never spoken of openly. Layla became his secret, one he indulged in but could never acknowledge publicly. Months later, when the affair inevitably soured, Layla felt used and discarded. Khalid pulled away, reminding her that his family and status came first. She returned home, ashamed and broken, but with a heart that had tasted forbidden love. When Omar entered her life soon after, polished, wealthy, and honorable, her parents saw salvation. They saw the opportunity to erase the past, to lift their daughter into a life of respectability. Layla said yes, not out of passion, but out of duty. She convinced herself she could bury her mistakes, start fresh, and become the wife her family wanted her to be. But secrets do not stay buried in Dubai's glittering world. Omar, ever the perfectionist, had connections everywhere. His family's name carried weight, and whispers reached him before long. A bride with a past was no small matter. Honor was delicate, and betrayal, real or perceived, was unforgivable. Unaware that the past would soon resurface, Layla tried to silence her guilt. But every time she scrolled through her phone and saw Khalid's name in old messages, her heart raced. Part of her longed to delete everything, to sever the thread completely. Another part couldn't. And that hesitation, that lingering tie, would become the crack that tore her new life apart. The Maldives honeymoon had ended, but the unease lingered. Back in Dubai, Omar resumed his routine business meetings, family gatherings, appearances at luxury events. Layla, however, slipped into the quiet rhythm of her new role as a wealthy housewife. Their villa in Emirates Hills was vast, staffed with maids and drivers, yet for Layla, the silence inside its walls often felt suffocating. At first, Omar was patient. He reminded himself that his wife was adjusting, that the transition from modest living to opulence could overwhelm anyone. But the unease he had noticed during the honeymoon refused to fade. Instead, it grew sharper, gnawing at him whenever he caught her staring off into the distance or quickly hiding her phone when he entered a room. One evening, during a dinner with his extended family, Omar overheard a subtle comment that made his blood run cold. His cousin, leaning a little too close after several glasses of wine, whispered, "Your Layla reminds me of someone I once knew very well." His smirk lingered just long enough to plant the seed of suspicion. Omar forced a laugh in response, masking his anger. But inside, a storm brewed. Was it possible that Layla had a past his family knew of, a past she had kept hidden from him? From that night on, Omar's watchfulness turned into quiet surveillance. He began noticing details he had once overlooked: her sudden withdrawals when certain names came up in conversation, the way she guarded her phone, her hesitance whenever he asked about her life before him. He started testing her. "Who were you messaging so late last night?" he asked casually one morning over breakfast. "Just a friend from back home," she replied quickly, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding his. Omar nodded, but the doubt lodged deeper. He began checking her phone when she left it unattended, scrolling through messages, looking for hidden contacts or traces of secrets. Though she was careful, deleting anything suspicious, he felt certain something lingered beneath the surface. His protectiveness soon shifted into control. He discouraged her from going out alone, insisting that the driver accompany her everywhere. He restricted her social interactions, subtly steering her away from gatherings where she might encounter people from her past. To outsiders, his behavior looked like devotion, a husband ensuring his wife's safety. To Layla, it was suffocating. "Why don't you trust me?" she asked one night, her voice trembling. Omar's eyes burned with intensity. "Trust is earned, Layla, and sometimes silence speaks louder than words." The more he pressed, the more she recoiled. Their marriage, barely months old, was already cracking under the weight of suspicion and fear. Layla's heart pounded with the dread that her past would one day catch up to her. Omar's every glance seemed to ask a silent question: "What are you hiding from me?" And though neither of them knew it yet, the answer to that question would not only destroy their marriage, it would cost someone their life. Layla thought she had left Khalid behind, buried with the mistakes of her youth. But the past has a way of resurfacing, especially in a city like Dubai, where secrets are traded as easily as gold. It began with a message. One afternoon, while Omar was away at a board meeting, Layla sat in the quiet villa scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. Her heart jolted when she saw the name flash across her screen: Khalid Al-Fahim. The text was brief, almost casual. "It's been a long time. I saw the wedding pictures. You looked beautiful." Her first instinct was to delete it, erase it as though it had never appeared. But her hands shook, frozen between fear and temptation. Memories flooded back: the late-night drives, the secret rendezvous, the intensity of his gaze. She hated him for how he had discarded her, yet a part of her still burned at the reminder of being desired so fiercely. For days, she ignored the message. But Khalid was persistent. More texts followed, then a call. Finally, when she answered, his voice was smooth, confident, unchanged. Layla, he said, almost like a lover greeting her after only hours apart. I had to hear your voice. She whispered back, trembling. You shouldn't be contacting me. I'm married now. This can't happen. And yet you answered, Khalid replied. His chuckle was low, knowing. Don't pretend you've forgotten what we had. Layla's stomach twisted. She should have hung up. She should have blocked him. But she didn't. The line between fear and desire blurred dangerously. What she didn't know was that Omar's suspicion had already reached its peak. That same week, he installed surveillance on her phone, a silent application feeding him copies of her texts and call logs. He told himself it was for peace of mind, but in truth, it was obsession. When Khalid's name appeared on the screen, Omar's world darkened. Rage simmered through his veins as he read the words, each one a dagger. Layla's silence, her secrecy, all of it now made sense. She wasn't just distant, she was still tethered to another man. To Omar, it wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. For a man of his standing, a stain on his honor was unforgivable. But he didn't confront her right away. Instead, he watched. He waited. He wanted to see how far she would go. Would she meet him? Would she betray him not just in messages, but in flesh? Layla, meanwhile, felt trapped. Every message from Khalid tightened the noose. She told herself she wouldn't respond again, but loneliness and the coldness of her marriage pushed her closer to the edge. Khalid knew exactly what to say, how to ignite the fire she tried so desperately to smother. And so, late one evening, when Omar returned home earlier than expected, he found Layla standing on the balcony, her phone glowing in her hands, her face soft with the smile she no longer gave to him. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the confirmation he needed. And with that discovery, the seeds of violence were sown. It started with hesitation, but it ended with surrender. Layla told herself she wouldn't meet Khalid, that she had too much to lose: her marriage, her family's pride, her safety. Yet his words lingered, wrapping around her like chains she couldn't break. One meeting, Layla, just to talk, nothing more. That's how he framed it. That's how she justified it to herself. The cafe was discreet, tucked away in a quieter corner of Jumeirah. Khalid arrived first, dressed in casual clothes that did nothing to dim the authority in his presence. When Layla walked in, his eyes lit up with a hunger that made her both weak and wary. You came, he said, rising to greet her. His smile was the same, smooth, commanding, intoxicating. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, sliding into the seat across from him. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her shawl, trying to mask the nervous energy coursing through her veins. And yet here you are. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You've been on my mind every day since we last saw each other. Tell me, Layla, has Omar ever made you feel the way I did? Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to shut him down, but the truth pressed heavily against her chest. Omar's wealth had given her security, but not passion, not fire. Khalid reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. The contact was electric, awakening a longing she had tried so hard to bury. For a moment, she let herself believe in the fantasy that she could escape the coldness of her marriage, that she could feel alive again, even if only briefly. What she didn't know was that she wasn't as invisible as she thought. Omar, suspicious of her every move, had ordered the driver to follow her discreetly. When Layla told him she was visiting a friend, Omar already knew the truth. His driver parked outside the cafe, snapping photos of her and Khalid together before sending them straight to Omar's phone. Omar's fury was volcanic, but he didn't storm in. Not yet. He wanted proof, undeniable evidence of betrayal. Proof he could use to justify the storm of vengeance brewing inside him. Inside the cafe, Khalid pressed further. Leave him, Layla. You know he can't give you what I can. We had something real, something you'll never forget. Tears pricked her eyes as she shook her head. You used me, Khalid. You left me once. How do I know you won't do it again? Khalid's smile faltered, then returned, softer this time. Because I can't stay away. Not now. Not after seeing you again. When she finally rose to leave, her body was trembling, her heart torn between loyalty and desire, fear and longing. Outside, the driver's eyes followed her as she slipped into the car. The trap was closing. Omar had everything he needed. The forbidden meeting wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that would set their world ablaze. The villa was silent when Layla returned that evening. Too silent. Normally, Omar would still be at his office or meeting clients, but tonight he was home, seated in the living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The lights were dim, his kandjara slightly rumpled, a rare sight for a man who prided himself on control. Layla hesitated at the door, sensing the tension that hung in the air like smoke. "You're home early," she said softly, forcing a smile. Omar didn't answer. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on her with a cold intensity that made her skin crawl. Finally, he held up his phone and tapped the screen. The images appeared grainy but clear enough. Layla sitting across from Khalid at the cafe, Khalid's hand grazing hers, her face tilted toward him, lips parted as if caught between hesitation and desire. The blood drained from her face. "Omar," her voice broke, "it's not what you think." He laughed bitterly, slamming the glass onto the table so hard it cracked. "Not what I think. Do you take me for a fool, Layla? You sat across from him like lovers, you let him touch you, and you dare stand in front of me and lie." Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped forward. "Please, listen to me. He came back into my life. I didn't ask for this. I was weak, yes, but I didn't betray you, not the way you believe." Omar rose, towering over her. His voice was low, shaking with barely contained rage. "Weakness is betrayal. Do you know what people will say if they find out? Do you know what this means for my name, my family's honor?" She flinched at the word honor. It wasn't just about love or loyalty for him. It was about pride, image, reputation, the things that mattered most in his world. "I married you because I believed you were pure," he hissed. "And instead you bring shame into my house." Layla dropped to her knees, sobbing. "I made a mistake, Omar, a terrible mistake, but please don't let this ruin us. I love you, I want this marriage to work." But her words only fueled his rage. He paced the room, his breath sharp and uneven. "Love, don't insult me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have met him. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth from the beginning." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by her sobs. Then Omar spoke again, his tone quieter but far more dangerous. "This ends now. You will never see him again. Do you understand me? Never, if you disobey me, Layla." His hand clenched into a fist. "I will not be responsible for what happens." Layla nodded frantically, her tears soaking into the marble floor. But deep inside, she knew the confrontation was only the beginning. Omar's suspicion had hardened into obsession, his love into possession. And possession, once threatened, could turn deadly. From that night forward, Omar was no longer the husband Layla had first married. Whatever tenderness he had once shown her was replaced with suspicion sharpened into obsession. He had caught a glimpse of betrayal, and now he saw shadows everywhere. He controlled her schedule with precision. Layla could no longer leave the villa without informing him of her exact destination, the driver instructed to report back at every turn. Her phone, already monitored, became a tool of his paranoia. He checked her calls, her texts, even her social media. If she received a message from an old friend, Omar demanded to know who they were and why they were contacting her. Layla felt the walls of her gilded cage closing in. The villa was luxurious, yes, but to her, it became a prison. The windows looked out over manicured gardens and glittering pools, yet she felt suffocated by the weight of his watchful eyes. At night, their bedroom turned cold. Omar's touches were no longer gentle, they were possessive, as if he were trying to remind her that she belonged to him, that she could not slip away. When she pulled back even slightly, his anger flared. "You are mine, Layla," he whispered one night, his voice low and menacing. "Don't forget that." Meanwhile, his obsession with Khalid grew. Omar began making discreet inquiries, using his network of contacts to track Khalid's movements. He discovered that Khalid was still active in Dubai's business circles, still wealthy, still untouchable in many ways. The thought of his wife ever glancing back at that man filled Omar with a rage, so consuming it kept him awake at night. Layla noticed the changes in him, the way he stared too long at her phone, the way his temper erupted over the smallest things. Once, she left her shawl in the car after returning from a grocery trip. When Omar saw it, he exploded, accusing her of deliberately being careless to hide something. "It's just a shawl," she cried. "To you, maybe," he spat. "To me, it's proof of lies." The more he tried to control her, the more she recoiled into silence. She began moving like a shadow through the villa, careful with her words, careful with her steps, careful with her breath. But fear has a way of cracking even the strongest facade. One evening, as she stood on the balcony gazing at the city lights, she whispered to herself, "This is not a marriage. This is a prison." What she didn't realize was that Omar was standing in the doorway, watching her, hearing every word. His face hardened. In his mind, Layla wasn't just unfaithful, she was ungrateful, disloyal, dangerous to his honor. And for a man like Omar, honor was worth more than life itself. The line between love and possession had blurred completely. What remained now was obsession, and obsession, once ignited, never ended without destruction. Despite Omar's suffocating control, the human heart has a way of reaching for what it craves most when it feels trapped. For Layla, that craving was not just love, it was freedom. And in her mind, freedom was tied to Khalid, the man who had once made her feel alive in a way Omar's cold possessiveness never could. Khalid had not given up. Weeks after their cafe meeting, he sent another message. "I can't stop thinking about you. One moment, Layla, that's all I ask." She deleted it immediately, terrified that Omar might see. But the words etched themselves into her thoughts, replaying whenever she sat in silence. She told herself she wouldn't respond, that Omar's fury had already made her situation dangerous. Yet loneliness whispered louder. One morning when Omar left for a meeting in Abu Dhabi, Layla finally gave in. Her hands trembled as she typed, "This has to stop. Please leave me alone." But Khalid, cunning as ever, twisted her rejection into opportunity. "If you truly wanted me gone, you wouldn't write at all. Meet me and I'll leave you in peace. Just once, Layla." The logic was flawed, but her heart, weakened by fear and longing, wanted to believe it. Against every warning in her mind, she agreed. They met in a private apartment Khalid kept in downtown Dubai. The moment she stepped inside, the city's noise vanished, replaced by the low hum of air conditioning and Khalid's commanding presence. He moved toward her with the confidence of a man who knew his power over her had never truly faded. "You're more beautiful than I remembered," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Layla's breath caught. She should have pushed him away, but her body betrayed her, leaning into the warmth of his touch. For a brief, dangerous moment, the fire they once shared rekindled. But passion never burns unnoticed for long. Omar, ever paranoid, had already sensed something. His driver reported that Layla had not gone where she claimed. And when Omar called her phone and she didn't answer, his suspicion solidified into certainty. By evening, Layla returned home, her shawl slightly disheveled, her nerves raw. She thought she had hidden every trace of the meeting, but Omar's eyes scanned her like a predator stalking prey. "You look tired," he said flatly, his tone carrying an undercurrent she couldn't decipher. "Yes, I just needed some air," she lied, forcing a weak smile. Omar didn't respond. He only nodded, his expression unreadable, but inside his mind, pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. For him, betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was fact, and fact demanded justice. Layla thought she had rekindled a forbidden flame in secret. What she didn't realize was that the fire had already spread beyond her control, and soon it would consume them all. The night was heavy with silence. Outside, Dubai glittered with its usual display of wealth and light, but inside the Al Mansour villa, darkness pressed in like a suffocating weight. Layla sat in the living room, nervously twisting her hands in her lap. Omar had barely spoken to her all evening. He ate in silence, eyes fixed on his plate, his jaw clenched tight. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown. Finally, he rose from the dining table, his phone in hand. "Come," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Layla followed, her heart pounding. He led her to his private study, a place she rarely entered. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing like a final seal. On the desk lay a stack of printed photographs, images she knew instantly, though her stomach twisted in horror when she saw them. Her with Khalid, entering the apartment, leaving hours later. The driver's silent watch had captured it all. "Explain," Omar said, his tone deceptively calm, though his eyes burned with fury. Layla's knees went weak. She clutched the edge of the desk for balance. "Omar, please, it's not what you think." "Not what I think." He slammed his fist onto the desk, the photographs scattering like broken glass. "You lied to me, you swore you would never see him again, and yet you went back to him. Do you think I wouldn't know? Do you think I'm blind?" Tears streamed down her face as she dropped to her knees. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it meant nothing, Omar. I swear to you it meant nothing." His laugh was hollow, bitter. "Nothing. You disgrace me in my own city, in my own home, with my own bloodline's cousin, and you say it meant nothing." She crawled toward him, clutching at the hem of his kandjara. "Please, forgive me. Don't let this destroy us. I will never see him again. I'll do anything you ask." But her pleas only stoked the fire. To Omar, her desperation was proof of guilt, not innocence. His honor was already stained, his pride shattered, and in his world there was only one way to cleanse dishonor: blood. He grabbed her by the shoulders and yanked her to her feet. His grip was iron, his face twisted with rage. "You were mine, Layla, mine, and now you've made me a fool." She struggled, sobbing, "Please, Omar, don't." His hand struck her across the face, the crack reverberating through the room. She fell against the desk, gasping for breath. But Omar wasn't finished. His fury had taken full command. "You think you can betray me and live?" he thundered, his voice trembling with fury. In a blind rage, he wrapped his hands around her throat. Layla's eyes widened in shock as she clawed at his grip, gasping for air. The room filled with her muffled cries, the scraping of her nails against his skin. For a moment their eyes locked, hers pleading, his blazing with hate. "Honor above all," Omar growled. "This ends tonight." Her body convulsed, her strength fading beneath his relentless grip. Finally, her resistance weakened, her movements slowing until they stopped altogether. Omar held on until the silence was complete, until the only sound was his own ragged breathing. When he released her, Layla crumpled to the floor, her lifeless eyes staring into nothing. The woman who had once been the jewel of his wedding, the dream of her parents, the love he had sworn to cherish, gone, reduced to a casualty of his pride. Omar staggered back, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The rage that had consumed him drained away, leaving behind a hollow cavern of shock and dread. He had defended his honor, yes, but in doing so he had destroyed everything. The villa was silent once more, but now it was a grave. And as Omar stood over Layla's body, he knew the world outside would soon demand answers. And no wealth, no power, no family name could protect him from the storm that was coming. Morning sunlight crept across the marble floors of the Al-Mansour villa, but inside, darkness still reigned. Layla's body lay cold and silent in Omar's study, her face pale, her once bright eyes staring into nothingness. Omar sat slumped in a chair nearby, his mind racing between denial and dread. For hours, he told himself he had defended his honor, that no court in the world could truly condemn him for what he had done. Yet deep inside, a gnawing fear grew stronger with every tick of the clock. By mid-morning, the house staff discovered her. A maid's scream echoed through the halls, shattering the fragile silence. Within minutes, the household was in chaos. Calls were made, relatives summoned, and eventually the police notified. When investigators arrived, Omar tried to compose himself. He stood tall, arms folded, insisting Layla had collapsed, that it was sudden, perhaps a heart attack, perhaps an accident. His wealth and influence gave weight to his words, but suspicion is a stubborn seed, and it had already taken root. The autopsy revealed the truth: bruising around the neck, hemorrhages in the eyes, the unmistakable signs of strangulation. Layla had not died by chance. She had been killed. News spread quickly. Whispers in Dubai's elite circles turned to headlines in international papers. Sheikh's daughter-in-law found dead in villa, murder or misfortune. Secrets behind closed doors of Dubai royalty. Omar's carefully constructed image began to crumble. Business partners distanced themselves. Relatives pressed for answers. The state, under growing pressure, could not ignore the scandal. Behind the scenes, Khalid was also questioned. He admitted to meeting Layla but denied involvement in her death. His confession about the affair only deepened the tragedy. It painted the full picture. A woman trapped between loyalty, desire, and fear. A husband consumed by rage. A forbidden love that ended in blood. Omar, once untouchable, now found himself cornered. In the interrogation room, stripped of his villa's luxuries, he appeared smaller, his arrogance drained. Confronted with evidence, photographs, messages, testimony, his silence spoke louder than denial ever could. The trial was swift but merciless. For some, Omar was a man defending his honor. For others, he was a murderer who abused power to silence a woman who sought happiness. The courtroom became a battleground of culture, law, and morality. In the end, judgment fell. Omar was convicted, his empire shattered, his name forever tarnished. Khalid disappeared from the public eye, rumored to have fled abroad. Layla was buried quietly, her parents left to mourn the daughter they had entrusted to a life of wealth, only to lose her to violence. But perhaps the most haunting legacy was not the verdict, nor the scandal, but the silence that followed. The silence of a villa once filled with opulence, now remembered only as the scene of betrayal and death. And in that silence, one truth remained unshakable. No matter how high the walls of wealth and power, secrets and sins always find their way out.